Do you remember part 1? The shocking reveal of Karen, the HOA queen who ruled with an iron fist, and her lover Terry, the slick operator who was pulling all the strings from behind the scenes? It was supposed to be the final chapter, right? But guess what? That was just the beginning. You thought Karen and Terry's reign of terror was over when I exposed their web of lies. But the truth I exposed? That was just the tip of the iceberg. In the weeks since the first expose, the neighborhood went through a hurricane of chaos, and as much as I thought I had won, I quickly learned that Karen and Terry weren't going to go down without a fight. If anything, they were now desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. You know the old saying, when you're cornered, you fight back harder. So here's the truth. While I thought revealing the truth about Terry's shady dealings and Karen's manipulation would destroy their influence in the neighborhood, the fallout only accelerated things. And what happened next? Well, it was bigger, messier, and more dramatic than I could have ever imagined. The HOA wasn't just a place for rules and fines anymore. It was the battleground where lives were ruined and reputations were shattered. And Karen? Oh, she was about to go down swinging. The moment I laid everything bare in the HOA meeting, I thought I had won. I had exposed the truth. And for the first time, people were seeing Karen and Terry for what they really were: manipulative frauds. The room fell silent as I showed them the emails, the transaction records, and even the testimonies I had gathered over weeks. But what happened next? It wasn't a peaceful resolution. It was chaos. Karen, standing at the front of the room, was visibly shaking. Her face had turned a shade of crimson as she stammered out her defense. "This is all lies. You're trying to ruin me." Her voice cracked, her usual composure replaced by a desperate panic. It was clear she was losing control. Karen's voice wobbled as she turned to the crowd, trying to force a smile. "Come on, guys, you know me. I've only ever done what's best for this community." But no one was nodding. No one was standing up for her. The silence stretched, and Karen's smile twitched, then disappeared completely. Her breathing got heavier. "You're all turning on me?" she screeched. "After everything I've done for you?" The room was dead still. And that's when it hit her. She had lost. Terry, ever the calm, collected figure, tried to salvage what was left of their reputation. But even his usual charm couldn't mask the fear in his eyes. He stepped forward, attempting to downplay the severity of the accusations, but his hands were trembling as he spoke. He wasn't the confident mastermind I'd once feared. He was a man on the edge. "Listen, this is just a misunderstanding," Terry said, his voice flat. "None of this is true. It's all—" "No, Terry, it's not," I interrupted, holding up another stack of documents. "You've been running a real estate scam under the guise of the HOA. You've manipulated property values, taken bribes, and misused your power for your own gain." The room was completely still for a moment, and then a murmur rippled through the crowd. I could see the shock on people's faces, their disbelief turning into anger. "We've all been victims," I continued. "Not just me, all of us. Karen and Terry have used their positions to control us, to make money off of our homes, and to exploit this entire community for their personal gain." That was when the dam finally broke. The few people who had been hesitant to speak up started to talk. Some shared their own experiences. Others began questioning the very foundation of the HOA and the authority that Karen and Terry had built. The power they'd held for so long was crumbling, and I could feel it in the air. It was as if we were finally awake. But then something unexpected happened. Karen, panicking, did something that left me speechless. She lunged toward the front, grabbing the stack of documents from my hand. "This is all a lie," she yelled, but it was no longer with confidence, it was with fear. But here's the twist. I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Just when Karen thought she could regain control of the room, I dropped the second bombshell. I knew they were both hiding something bigger, something more damaging than anything they had tried to cover up before. I had spent days digging deeper into their business, and now I was ready to show the world exactly who they really were. Karen, you want to keep lying? I said, standing tall. Then let's talk about your past. You think everyone forgot, huh? You think you can hide behind a pretty face and your fake charity work? But I know about your fraudulent history. A silence blanketed the room as I revealed the papers. The documents contained a series of court records showing Karen's history of scams, dating back to her previous neighborhoods. She had been involved in several shady dealings with multiple HOAs in other cities, using her position to exploit homeowners and gain leverage for her own benefit. I didn't just expose her in front of the board. I exposed her in front of everyone. Look at this, I said, showing a detailed report of a legal dispute where Karen had been sued for false accusations and property damage caused by her under-the-table deals. She's been running this con for years. She's not just a control freak, she's a criminal. The atmosphere in the room shifted. I could see people in the audience leaning forward, some in shock, others in disgust. It was like a switch had been flipped. The once untouchable Karen was now exposed for what she truly was. A fraud with a long history of manipulating everyone around her. I turned to look at Terry, who was now sweating, his calm demeanor completely gone. And Terry? You're not innocent in all this either. Let's talk about your business practices. The way you've been involved in stealing homes through deceptive real estate deals. I've got records here that show you've been working with developers to artificially inflate property values, forcing families out and profiting off their misfortune. The board members, who had once been Karen's puppets, started to murmur, and I could see the shift happening. Terry's face went pale, and Karen was no longer shouting in anger. Instead, she was visibly shaking, her body rigid as she clutched the table in front of her. Her power was slipping away, and she knew it. But even with all this evidence in front of them, they still tried to fight back. "None of this matters," Karen shrieked. "It's all lies. You can't just ruin our lives like this." The people in the room were no longer buying it. They had finally seen the truth. Terry was trying to pull away, but I wasn't done. This was only the beginning. As the tension in the room escalated, I saw it. Terry trying to make a quick exit. He had been cornered, and his reaction was as telling as anything I'd seen so far. While Karen was still trying to play the victim, Terry was slipping out of the meeting room, likely thinking that if he could just get away, the storm would pass. But I wasn't about to let him off that easy. "Terry, where are you going?" I called out, my voice cutting through the noise. But it was no use. He was already halfway to the back door, trying to make a run for it. He had been caught in the act, and now he was running scared. "You can't just leave," I shouted after him. The room was still buzzing, but all eyes were now on Terry, who was desperate to escape the consequences of his actions. In his panic, Terry tripped on the doorframe, almost falling as he struggled to maintain his composure. It was a humiliating moment, but it was exactly what he deserved. He had thought he could get away with this for so long, but now his world was coming apart at the seams. By the time Terry got outside, the police had already been called by some of the more concerned neighbors who had witnessed everything unfold. And soon, Terry's world came crashing down. No longer the smooth-talking, confident man he had once been, Terry was now a fugitive. The first part of the aftermath was already unfolding, but there was still so much left to uncover. Karen and Terry were exposed, their power crumbling before their eyes. But what happened next? The true fallout would stretch far beyond the walls of that HOA meeting room, and the consequences would be even more dramatic than I could have ever predicted. Terry was gone. His hasty exit left behind a trail of confusion, but most importantly, fear. The moment he ran, it became clear to everyone that the grip Karen and Terry once held over this community was slipping away fast. No one could ignore it now. The truth was out, and the power dynamic had shifted. Karen was still standing at the front, her entire body rigid. The once assertive woman who had controlled every decision in this HOA now appeared fragile, broken, and desperate to hold on to whatever shred of authority she had left. The community wasn't scared of her anymore. She looked around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to take her side. But no one did. One by one, the neighbors who had once cowered under her rule started to leave, walking right past her without a word. They weren't just leaving the meeting, they were leaving her behind. Her hands were shaking as she clutched the edge of the table, trying to maintain some sense of composure. But it was obvious to everyone that she was spiraling. "What's going to happen to Terry?" Someone in the back of the room finally spoke up. The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. The neighborhood had already started calling the authorities. A few of the more courageous neighbors had decided it was time to take matters into their own hands, and they didn't hesitate to make sure the police were on their way. Karen could only stand there, helpless, as she realized that her world, and Terry's, was crumbling. It didn't take long for the police to arrive. By the time the officers walked in, Terry had been long gone, his desperate escape having left him in a whirlwind of regret. As the officers spoke to the neighbors who had witnessed the chaos, the air was thick with tension. Karen tried to play the victim. "You don't understand," she cried, wiping away fake tears. "He's not like this. He's just upset. This is all a misunderstanding. I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to protect the neighborhood." Karen's breath hitched as she scanned the room, her eyes wild with panic. She pointed at me. "You," she spat. "You think you're a hero? You're a liar, a troublemaker." Her face twisted with rage before she suddenly turned to the HOA board. "You can't let them do this to me. I made this neighborhood what it is." But the board members only looked away, ashamed. Karen's hands balled into fists, her voice breaking. "Please," she whispered, voice trembling. "Please, don't do this to me." But no one was buying it, not anymore. People from the neighborhood who had been quietly intimidated by Karen for years started speaking up. They shared their experiences of manipulation, of rules that didn't apply to her and Terry, and of how they had been forced into a corner by their twisted version of justice. As they spoke, Karen's mask slowly fell, and the woman who had once seemed invincible was reduced to nothing more than a pathetic liar. But that wasn't all. The real revelations were just beginning. The next few days were beyond chaotic. News of the HOA scandal spread quickly through the community, and with it, the pieces of the puzzle that no one had been able to put together for years. With Terry gone, Karen was left to face the music alone. But the music wasn't sweet. It was a harsh, discordant tune that played over and over as everyone began to talk. As more neighbors came forward, more hidden truths about Karen and Terry's schemes were revealed. People I never thought would speak out began sharing the horrible details of their experiences. Suddenly, it was as if everyone had been waiting for someone to finally stand up to them. And once that first domino fell, the rest tumbled quickly. Karen had used her power to force people to pay ridiculous fines for trivial violations, many of which were entirely fabricated. I was handed a stack of complaints, all showing how Karen had manipulated the HOA's rules to target specific people, using the system to line her pockets with money from fines. One neighbor, who had been fined thousands of dollars for an unsightly lawn, came forward and revealed how she had been threatened with foreclosure unless she paid. It wasn't the first time Karen had made similar threats, but this time, the neighbors were empowered. The people Karen had controlled for years now realized the depth of her manipulation, and they weren't going to stand for it anymore. And then there were the illegal deals Terry had orchestrated. He had been using the HOA's influence to influence real estate transactions. He and Karen had conspired with shady developers to buy up homes at bargain prices, only to flip them for a profit once the neighborhood's values increased artificially. The records I had unearthed showed how Karen and Terry had manipulated zoning laws and bribed contractors to help with the deals. Terry had been buying properties on the side, using his HOA connections to drive up prices for everyone else. The web of corruption was so tangled that it was hard to keep track of it all. But every day, it felt like the noose around Karen's neck tightened more and more. Once the full scope of Karen and Terry's actions came to light, the neighborhood didn't just sit back and wait for justice. They took action. Neighbors who had been bullied into submission now had the courage to speak out. People who had been afraid to confront the HOA leadership for fear of retaliation began organizing. A petition was circulated, demanding that Karen be removed from the HOA entirely. People who had long felt powerless were now empowered. The support for the petition grew quickly, with nearly every homeowner signing it. They were ready to take back their neighborhood, and Karen was going to pay for what she had done to them. But that wasn't the only thing happening. The community also banded together to sue Karen and Terry for their fraudulent activities. Legal teams started looking into the real estate schemes and misappropriated fines, and it wasn't long before the authorities launched a full investigation. I had never seen the neighborhood so united. For the first time in years, people felt like they had a say in what was happening to them. The fear that Karen had instilled in so many was slowly being replaced with strength. We were no longer the silent victims. We were taking control. But even though Karen and Terry had been exposed, it wasn't over yet. Karen wasn't going down without a fight. She tried every trick in the book to save face. But it was too late. Her final stand came when she tried to publicly defend herself one last time at a community meeting. I watched her from the back of the room as she made her case. But this time, there was no confidence in her voice, only desperation. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "I was only trying to protect the community. I wanted to make sure everything was in order. I never meant to hurt anyone. Terry and we were just trying to help. But it wasn't working anymore. No one was buying it." The people who had once been too intimidated to speak up were now standing tall in front of her. They were no longer afraid of Karen's threats or her manipulative tactics. As Karen's final defense crumbled, I stepped forward. "Karen," I said, my voice calm but firm, "it's over. You can't lie your way out of this anymore." With those words, the last shred of her authority evaporated. Karen stood there, her face pale, her lips trembling, as the community turned their backs on her. Terry was still gone, and Karen was left to face the consequences of her actions alone. In the weeks that followed, Karen's downfall was swift and unrelenting. She was removed from the HOA, her influence completely destroyed. The community took legal action against her and Terry, and both of them were facing serious charges. As for the neighborhood, we had finally reclaimed what was rightfully ours. The HOA was restructured, and people were finally able to live in peace. The dark cloud that had hung over us for so long had finally lifted. But there was one thing I'll never forget about this whole ordeal. It wasn't just about exposing Karen and Terry. It was about empowerment. The community had come together to dismantle the corruption, and in doing so, we had created a new foundation for the future. The HOA no longer had the same power it once did. And the residents of the neighborhood? We had learned a powerful lesson. Never let anyone manipulate you, no matter how powerful they seem. In the end, the truth always wins. As I reflect on everything that happened, I can't help but feel a sense of pride. It wasn't just about taking down a corrupt HOA. It was about standing up for what's right, about reclaiming our community from those who thought they could control us. Karen thought she ran this neighborhood. Terry thought he was untouchable. But in the end, they were just two frauds who finally got what was coming to them. That was intense, right? But the story doesn't end here. For more such wild stories, don't forget to subscribe. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like, comment, and share. See you in the next video.